Okay, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, it's my great honor to present to you Mr. Len Bowers, who is the person behind this Safewards model. Len is from England, from UK, from King's College, from London, and he has been doing research on this topic for over 20 years. And now we are very happy to have you here. He has been working very hard with the Finnish audience. This is your third show in this short trip, and yesterday we were in Kellokoski, and on Wednesday you were in Psykiatriakeskus, and now you are here. We are very happy to have you here, and Len, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction and for that brief overview of all of the work which has been done by people already here to translate the Safewards resources. And thank you to you all in person for coming to listen to me this morning. I hope I'm going to be able to give you something which is a little bit worthwhile and makes your trip worthwhile for you. What did I want to say first? First, Lowry suggested that I was the person behind Safewards. Well, I'm sort of the person behind Safewards, but I stand for and represent a lot of people here. Who do I represent? I represent all of the people who've worked on my research team over the past 20 years on a variety of different research projects. That's about 40 or 50 people who've all made a contribution to what Safewards actually is. If we think beyond those people, think about all of the nurses out there in England and in many other European countries who have participated in my research studies. That would be many hundreds of service users who've agreed to be interviewed. Many, probably thousands of psychiatric nurses who have signed consent forms, agreed to be interviewed, and contributed by completing surveys and questionnaires and sending them back to me. But those are not all of the people who've made a contribution to Safewards, because you've also got to think about the people who funded the various projects that I did. So that involves a lot of funding organisations and administrators and managers, all of those people who look at and read and review grant applications and meet in rooms to decide who's going to get the money. All of those had a part in Safewards as well. All of the people who raise the money. Some of my money has come from charitable sources, which means that there's been a lot of fundraising, so all of those people have contributed to Safewards as well. I think you begin to get the story. And I'm going to tell you about a few more people as well who've made a contribution to Safewards. So if I'm here for anything, I am here to represent them in order to say what it is that all of their work has given rise to. And if there is one thing that I would ask of you in return, as practitioners in Finland, it would be that you would contribute to research which is ongoing in this country about the practice of mental health nursing. So the next time you get sent a questionnaire in the post which is to do with a mental health nursing or a mental health research study, please fill it in and respond to it, because that enables people like me at the top to take that information and turn it into something really useful that will eventually come back to you in practice. Now, I often go out and ask people to fill out these questionnaires, and what psychiatric nurses typically say to me is, oh, you researchers have never done anything for me, and I fill out this questionnaire and I never hear anything back about the study, and nobody ever tells me anything about it, and I suppose I feel like I've wasted my time. Well, you might not hear anything immediately, but that one questionnaire goes together with all of the other questionnaires. That turns into a publication. That journal publication gets published in a journal. That journal publication is read worldwide by academic psychiatric nurses, by those people who are doing literature reviews to put together all of the papers together and see what they've learned. That's where I got a lot of my information for Safewards, was from over 1,000 of those previous studies that people have done. And then that information gets put together and people are able to come back to you and present you with a product that says, here's something you can use in your practice that not only is going to make your own professional lives better, but is going to improve what patients experience on our wards. So please, next time you get a questionnaire, I'm running a campaign here for research in Finland. Next time you get a questionnaire for research, please participate and fill it in and do it fully and as honestly as you possibly can, because that information is really, really important for our collective future as mental health nurses. This is the way we build a future for ourselves. It's one of the many ways in which we improve our practice and what we can do. I don't really mean to say all of that. I don't know how I got there. Let's go back to Safewards. Look, when I started doing research around about 20 years ago, or moved into full-time research, these were the things I decided I was going to research. Stuff to do with safety, and primarily on acute inpatient psychiatric wards and inpatient care. I thought there'd not been a lot of research about inpatient psychiatry. I was a little bit ignorant at that time because I found out there's actually quite a bit. But I decided to do it around safety because I thought, well, here's somewhere where I can make a contribution. And these are it turned into these two topics. Conflict, those events that patients do that can cause them or those around them harm, and that ranges from aggression and rule breaking and substance alcohol use through to absconding, going missing, medication refusal, self-harm and suicide. And containment being all of the things that we do to try and stop those things from happening in the first place, or if they do happen, to ameliorate the outcomes, to make the outcomes less severe, to make sure less harm happens. And that includes things like PRN medication, the coerced intramuscular injections we give people, special observation, seclusion, manual restraint, timeout, and including here your use of mechanical restraints, these terrible straps and beds that you use here in Finland. We don't use those in the UK. So that includes all of those things. Why count these two things together? How is it that you can count aggression and suicide and people who abscond all together? Well, that's because the very first thing I discovered as I started carrying out research in this area is that those things correlate together, they run together within patients. So a patient who is aggressive is also more likely to abscond. A patient who runs away from the ward is also more likely to refuse medication. Same goes for containment. A patient who is subject to seclusion is also more likely to be subject to coerced intramuscular medication, is more likely to get PRN medication. That's number one. Those things also run together within wards, though. You can have two wards next door to each other in the same hospital, providing the same sort of service to the same sorts of patients coming from the same sorts of areas, same parts of town, and yet one of those wards can have 10 or 20 times as much conflict and containment as the ward next door. So those run together within wards. A ward that gives out high rates of PRN medication is also likely to use a lot of seclusion, is also likely to use a lot of special observation. A ward that has high levels of aggression is also likely to have high levels of absconding, etc. Those are very strong empirical findings. That's what you find when you take these facts from a lot of wards over a lot of hospitals and from a lot of patients over many, many studies. What that's suggesting is that there are common causes here. There's something about the way that we operate, there's something about the way that we run wards, something probably about our nursing practice, but potentially also about multidisciplinary practice, that accounts for those differences between wards. And if I, the researcher, could figure out what it was we were doing that made those differences, then that would enable me to say exactly what it was that we could do in order to reduce the rates of conflict and containment. And that's what I've learned, I suppose, over the past 20 years. I've been trying to fill out those details, and now I think I have them. And I've kind of put them together in an organized fashion, which we refer to as the Safewards model. So these are the sources of the Safewards model, and some of those I've mentioned already. So there's my research program on which these 40 or 50 people actually worked on over a period of 20 years. We've done some of the largest studies of absconding by psychiatric inpatients, interviewed 120 nurses at our 3 high security hospitals about their attitudes to and how they worked with the most difficult and challenging patients. In the City 1 to 8 study, we collected data over a 6-month period on 136 acute psychiatric wards. And we collected that and we were looking at what correlated together, what went together with high rates of conflict and containment. In the City Nurses project, we took 5 wards, and we tried to produce some kind of change on them. That was our first attempt to try and make some changes towards low conflict and low containment practice. It sort of worked and sort of didn't work. We learned a lot from that process that went subsequently into the Safewards model. In the Tompkins acute ward study, we followed up 16 acute psychiatric wards over a period of 5 years. And we looked at how conflict and containment went up and down over time. And we went and interviewed the nurses repeatedly every 3 months, saying, what's going on in your ward? Have you had any particular patients been admitted? Have you had any staff changes? What's been going on? Any policy changes? And we also repeatedly interviewed the consultant psychiatrists who were working on those wards to see what they thought was changing. And we were taking lots of questionnaires repeatedly every 3 months, trying to tie down what went together with those different fluctuations. You can see some other studies in there. I'm not going to tell you about them all because I could do a whole presentation or several presentations on each of them. But that's one big source of learning that has gone into the Safewards model. The other big source of learning that's gone in there has been the cross-topic literature review, where we've looked at all conflict and containment items. So most of the time, when those of us who work in academia are trying to find out what past research has been done on a particular topic, especially in this area, we might pick one aspect of conflict or containment. So we might pick something like, let's say, special observation by nurses. And then we'll look back for all of the previous research which has been done about special observation by nurses. It might be that we probably don't have enough time to look at it all, so we might place some limitations on that. We might only look at the stuff which is published in English, or we might only look at things which have been published since 1980 until now, because if we include it all, it makes too much for us to kind of process and put together. In this big cross-topic literature review, we looked at everything. So we didn't just look at special observation, we looked at the literature on seclusion, the literature on aggression, the literature on absconding, the literature on seclusion, coerced IM medication, and we used the same method on all of it. And not only did we do that, we looked at it literally at all of the previous decent scientific research literature from 1960 onwards. So that ended up being 1,181 different published studies that gave us information about conflict and containment and what the causes might be. And it's quite clear that no one person, no one academic can process that quantity of information. So what we did was we used the same systematic review methodology, but it was operated by different people, and what came into me were the summaries of the overall lessons from all of these different pieces of research about what sorts of patients engaged in these behaviors, what sorts of situations they arose in, what typically happened afterwards, what were the consequences, what was all of the information we had about studies which had attempted to change these things, and a whole range of other stuff. And that was the other big source for the Safewards model. But you would think that after all of that literature, so we've got 14 people worked on that literature review, and that was over a period of many years. So some of the earlier literature reviews are now well out of date because they were conducted up to 10 years ago now. There's scope, there's some things that you can do. Those of you who are in academia, where are you, Paivi? You in the audience somewhere? That's something for you to do. So there's more of those to update. You'd think that after you put all of that stuff together and all of these enormous pieces of research that I'd done, once you'd put all of those together, that I'd be able to come here and tell you the definitive answer. I could say to you, it is absolutely plain. Nobody would disagree with me that the causes of these differences between wards in conflict and containment rates are due to 1, 2, 3, and 4. I would love it to be that way, But unfortunately, it's not that way. What you have out there in terms of the literature is a lot of diverse findings looking in different directions at different times. Most of the previous research that has been done is the easy sort of research, and the easy sort of research is the stuff where people go out there and look at practice and see what's going on and describe what's happening, or count the frequency of incidents, rather than try to directly investigate the causes or prove what the causes are. Of that sort of high-level kind of experimental literature, there's actually very little. Out of these 1,181 studies that we located, there were 5 or 6 controlled trials out of the entire bunch, 5 or 6 randomized controlled trials out of the entire lot, which shows you the difference between the levels of relatively easy but not strong research versus that research which is very difficult to do but is very strong in its findings. So it doesn't give you a clear picture at the end of that. So that means that I had to fill in the gaps. I had to sit in my armchair. This is what you think us academics do at work. You think that we come into work and the first thing that we do is we sit around in an office and drink coffee and eat cake. Well, actually they do. I've seen this, yes. But not in England. And then you think we sit in our armchairs in our office and perhaps put on some light music on the radio and close our eyes and dream about what the interpretation of all of our data is and think about what it might all mean. Well, certainly we do a lot of thinking, yeah, but it doesn't happen quite like that, because most of the time we're out there teaching classes, speaking to people like I am now, and the other part of the time we're marking and doing administration. Another part of the time we're running all of our research projects, so our actual thinking time is short. I didn't actually sit in my office and put my feet up and dream up this Safewards model, although I had to do a lot of thinking. My thinking time was when I cycle. So I cycle to work and back every day in London, and I find that's great thinking time for me, and I have a great aid to my thinking is mobile phone. And every time I have a thought or some new interpretation or some new ideas, then I'll stop the bike and I'll set the voice recorder going on my phone, and I'll be like, it's like I'm having a phone conversation, but I'm actually downloading all of my ideas from up here into the phone, and then I can type them out on a computer. But there was a fair amount of that interpretation in the Safewards model. There were big gaps there in the literature about what it is that might cause certain things. There were deep uncertainties about the evidence and what the evidence might be saying. Nevertheless, there's all of this stuff out there, all the products of my own research, all of these 1,181 research studies did kind of coalesce into a kind of pattern, and I plugged the gaps and arranged it and moved things round until it made some kind of sense. Right. That means that what I present to you as the Safewards model is a highly imperfect form of explanation about what's going on to account for these differences between wards. It means that in another 5 years, another 10 years, another 20 years of research, things are going to look a bit different, and hopefully we'll be a bit further, and somebody younger will come along and review all of my previous research and other people's research and come up with a far more certain answer to these things. So it's a highly imperfect picture, but the other thing I can say to you is it's the best picture that I can produce at this time based on the evidence that I've put together and based on the evidence that other people have put together. I'm going to pause slightly now for questions. I have an able translator here in Lowry who's going to help us with any linguistic issues. So does anybody want to ask any questions at this point?
Niin, nyt olisi pieni tauko tässä. Jos tulee kysymyksiä tai kommentteja, niin olkaa hyvä. Voitte kysyä myös suomeksi, jos haluatte, mutta myös englanniksi. Muilla kielillä ei. Rohkeasti vaan. Tiedän, että teillä on kuitenkin jotain mielessä.
Well, I've got a question then. Which of you, put your hands up if you're going to fill out the next questionnaire that you get in the post? Yeah. Come on, hands up, come on. I'm forcing you to make a commitment. You know, this is basic psychology. I know that if I make you put your hand up now, you're far more likely to carry through when that questionnaire drops into your inbox. Are you all following me, or am I going too fast? What about those of you on the back row? It's a really bad mistake to sit on the back row at one of my lectures. There's a young lady in a pink top there. Are you understanding what I'm saying? Yes. Yeah. Are you enthusiastic about research now? Good, excellent. Okay, if there are no further questions at the moment, I'll carry on, but remember that I will pause regularly in the course of this presentation and Lowry will be available. We can sort out if there are any translation issues about particular words. So things like conflict and containment can be quite problematic to translate sometimes. And we'll certainly pause again when I start talking about different sorts of psychiatric wards in the UK, because they are different. It's different from your system, and you need to understand where it was that I conducted the research that I did. So we'll go on to talk about the Safewards model. This is the Safewards model in its simple form. If we start at this end, what we did was identify 6 different domains, 6 different features of the way that inpatient psychiatry operated that could or might give rise to potential flashpoints. Flashpoints were individual psychological or psychosocial situations, either within patients, between patients, or between patients and staff, that might or might not give rise to an incident of conflict. And as we know, conflict can include aggression, absconding, self-harm, suicide, etc. And that incident of conflict, if it occurred, may or may not give rise to an incident of containment. That's really, really easy. You've got to be able to follow that. What you see there is what we further managed to identify was all of the places that we, you and I, can have an impact on that process. So let me explain. We can change the way that psychiatry operates. We can change the features of these originating domains so that they lack the capacity to give rise to those flashpoints, or have a diminished capacity to give rise to those flashpoints. We can cut the connection between the originating domain and the flashpoint. So if we can't change the originating domain, we can get in there early and stop it from producing the flashpoint. If the flashpoint happens, we can get in there afterwards and prevent that connection to an actual conflict behavior. And if the conflict behavior occurs, we can alter the connection to containment, and certainly we can choose which containment to use because we're the people that are using it. So what we identified were all the places where we, the staff, can modify this process so as to reduce the rates of conflict and containment. Similarly, we identified that patients were a big part of this process, and the way that patients responded to and behaved towards each other could themselves cut the connection between the originating domain and the flashpoint so that it didn't happen. And if the flashpoint did happen, could prevent that flashpoint from moving into an actual conflict behavior. So this is one of the key things about the Safewards model, is that it tells us what the staff modifiers are. And we can influence the way that patients behave towards each other, so we can influence the patient modifiers as well. So we have a big potential influence in that system, and that's what Safewards model enables you to know. So these 6 originating domains are these things. There's the way we operate. The staff team operates together, the degree to which we give rise to a solid, consistent structure of internal rules and routines that's based on an ethic of equality, legitimacy, and mutual respect. The efficiency with which we operate the ward, the consistency of our ideology and the purpose of the ward and our customs and practice around that. Then number 2 would be the physical environment of the ward, how complex it is, what the shape of it is, whether the door's locked, what kind of quality the ward environment has, and what are the availability of various things. Now, when I said to you that psychiatric nurses in the UK don't use these mechanical belts and straps that you have here, it's not because we're more virtuous than you are, it's not even because we're more clever than you are, and it's not because we've got any magic techniques or whatever for averting the situations that happen that give rise to them or for managing them. No, we're just the same as you, or possibly even a little bit worse. What the big difference is, we don't have them. I mean, if you don't have them, you can't use them. So it's one of my big recommendations to psychiatry in Finland would be that you just get rid of those things, and once you get rid of them, after a few years you won't even miss them. You'll wonder why you needed them in the first place. Physical environment, what it provides for, you use. Influence of outside hospital, what's going on in the patient's friends and family, what news is filtering through, what messages they're getting, what occurs during visits has a big impact on the way patients behave. But also the sorts of news that we can give people, the stuff around, outside hospital, what I'm thinking of, in terms of what the meaning of the person's hospital stay has for them. When we tell somebody that they're going to be discharged to somewhere within a few weeks, and maybe it's somewhere where they don't want to go. Maybe it's somewhere where they think particularly devalues them. Maybe when they were admitted, they were living independently, and when they're discharged, they're going to some kind of supported accommodation. We might think that's all terribly good, and they're going to be very happy about that. But that might represent a big loss of independence for them, and that has a big knock-on effect on the meaning of their discharge for them. And when the meaning of that discharge changes, it means that their behavior leading up to that discharge is going to change. If they don't want to go there, then they might behave in all kinds of ways to try and avert or not be happy about that particular change. So the meaning of somebody's inpatient admission is important. Patient community, we've already talked about how patients relate to and interact with each other, what interpretation they place on each other's behavior, how they understand or fail to understand each other and each other's symptoms, and also the capacity for contagion and discord between patients and for copying of different behaviors that they see on the ward. There's a clear capacity for copying that goes on between patients, and that means that particular habits, particular ways of behaving can spread across a whole patient community, a whole locality, even a country quite quickly, so that there get to be embedded forms of patient disturbed behavior that are actually extremely culturally local. There you go. Patient characteristics, their actual symptomatology, their demographic features are also important because it shapes how they perceive the world and what is going on and how they then respond to it. And lastly, the overall regulatory framework of psychiatry from the mental health legislation system that we work with that enables us to exert power over patients in certain legally authorized ways, through the hospital policy that says what can and can't happen for individual patients in certain circumstances, through the national policies and whatever your Department of Health says about how things are going to operate in psychiatry, and right through to things like funding decisions made at Department of Health level about how many beds are going to be available in what areas and where they're going to be situated, because that all shapes at the end who is in hospital, what patient behaviors are going to occur, and all of the whole context of inpatient psychiatry. So those are the 6 originating domains that can give rise to particular flashpoints. And there's the whole model. A, I don't expect you to read this because there's too much writing on there anyway, and B, it's in English, so you don't want to be reading this anyway. But it's all available in Finnish, and it's all available in the website that Lauri has already pointed out to you. What I want to point you to is these 6 originating domains. In here is the definition of each of the flashpoints. So you can go there and see what are the flashpoints related to these individual domains. Those are the particular situations that might give rise to an incident of conflict. And around here in the next ring are all the staff modifiers. They're all the stuff that we do or can do that could interfere with those flashpoints happening, or once they'd happened, prevent them from leading to an incident of conflict or containment. So in a certain sense, you don't need to listen to the rest of my lecture now, because you can go home, you can look at the website, there's all of that material, and you can make some decisions all by yourself about what you're going to do to reduce conflict and containment. So you can go there and you pick out, what can we do on my ward about, what should we pick? What should we do about denial of request under flashpoints there? A flashpoint is when a patient asks for something and you have to say no. So what can we do? What can I do in my individual nursing practice? How can I change my individual nursing practice so that's less likely to give rise to an incident of conflict and then containment? What can we do collectively on this ward to try and make sure that a denial of a patient's request doesn't give rise to an incident of conflict and containment? And you can start to generate your own ideas about what you might do together about doing that. I'm going to tell you some of the Safewards ideas and what we researchers had time to think about. But that doesn't mean that you can't think of other things or create your own interventions that will enable you to reduce rates of conflict and containment in your own individual practice or collectively on your wards. So if you want to go home now and figure out your own interventions, that's absolutely fine. This is my gift to you. This is my present to you from all of this previous work, all those 1,181 other papers done by dedicated researchers, all of those tens of thousands of people that must have participated in those previous studies. You know, if you want to think about some of the most moving things that there is in that research, there is a literature about inpatient suicide that includes data from Finland, I know because I did this piece of literature review myself, that covers more than several thousand inpatient suicides. Right? So over periods of years, we've looked back over data and at statistics and things that have gone on in hospitals for many, many years, and that includes information about thousands of inpatient suicides. And that information's been collected together and gets together in this Safewards model. So if you want to take all of that information and what it says about how we can prevent such events, it's all there in the Safewards model. You can take it away. Please use it. It's my gift. It's the gift of all of these people who've done research in this area, and it's for you to use. So in a certain sense, the rest of this presentation is about how we, the research team, used it to create the Safewards interventions and to prove that they actually worked, and what we've been doing to kind of market and share that idea since. But this is the most important part of the presentation is now done. Most important part of the presentation is to hand over to you this precious information on which people have spent whole lifetimes of their research careers trying to produce and write about as carefully and as rigorously as they can. It's for you. It's for your individual psychiatric nursing practice so that you can use it. That is a sobering thought. I'll skip that and we'll go straight into what we actually did. So you're still here, so you're still a bit curious about what it was that we actually did with it. I've suggested that you take that model and you can develop your own ideas. Well, we in the research team, there was about, I think, 15 of us working together around about this point. We generated a whole set of intervention ideas that we thought we could go to wards with and suggest that they do that might reduce rates of conflict and containment on their wards. We came up with very nearly 300 different ideas. We were jotting them down all over the place. We had a system for placing them on a shared drive on our network so that people, as they were reading the literature and coming to terms with all of this information, could generate their ideas and put them together. Nearly 300 ideas for interventions. Obviously, we couldn't conduct any kind of trial and go along to a ward like yours. Do you work on a ward? Yeah, so we couldn't come to your ward and say to you, we'd like you to sign up to this research trial. Please, would you make 300 changes to your practice? This was never going to work. So we had to pick a smaller number. And we had to figure out those ones which were going to be the easiest for you to do, those ones that we thought you were most likely to really do if we asked you to do them, and those that we thought, if you really did do them, would have the biggest effect on rates of conflict and containment. So that's what we went on to do. First of all, we had a big exercise of scoring all of those 300 ideas to decide which were the best ones, which were the most feasible, which were the most powerful, etc., which were the ones that were most marketable and saleable to people like yourselves who are working on the wards. That enabled us to get the list down to about 30 different interventions. At that point, we'd started with these ideas. These ideas were just written down, just a sentence or two describing what they might be. At that point, we took those 30 different ideas and we turned them into fuller descriptions of what they might actually look like when you did them on the ward. So who would have to do what? How would it happen? Would people need any training or not? How would you actually make them happen? What resources would people need to make them happen? How did they connect to the actual stuff in the underlying, how well did they connect to the underlying theories in the Safewards model, and how likely were they to be successful? So with that ended up being 2 or 3 pages of description about these individual interventions. It was some of that material that turned into the intervention descriptions that you'll now find on the safewards.net website. So we had 30 of these, then we took them to groups of service users and clinical experts. So we recruited nationally in the UK all of the people who we thought were particular experts on acute inpatient psychiatric care. This included nurse consultants and also ward managers and some practicing nurses. So we had 2 groups of those, and we presented these 30 different ideas to them, and we asked them which they thought was the best, which they thought were going to work really, really well, or which of them they thought they'd have no idea, actually no chance to actually implement on their busy acute psychiatric wards. 2 groups of them, and a group of service users and carers as well that we presented the same information to, asking them which they thought were the best. And one of the interesting things about this exercise was that none of these 3 groups of people actually agreed with each other. They all had very, very different ideas about the different interventions. One group that thought one intervention was terrible, the next group thought was okay but difficult to do. The third group thought, oh, absolutely, you have to do that, that's wonderful. And so it went on throughout all of the feedback exercises that we conducted. So what we got actually most out of those exercises was some detailed consideration about how we should actually implement the interventions and how we should change them or modify them so that they became more possible to introduce. And in the end, out of all of that information, I had to make some kind of sensible decision about what we were going to proceed, how we were going to proceed and what we were going to go forward with. Because 30 is still too much to ask you to do. Can you do 30 interventions by next week, please? Are you going to sign my consent form and say yes? No, not even after you've been to this lecture. Not if you've got any sense. 30 is too much. So we got it down to 16, and we then took 16 to the Homerton Hospital in East London that I'd been working with over a long period of time on many research studies, and asked them to do a pilot study of those 16. So they took the 16 interventions and they tried to implement them. And we gave them lots of support and resources, and we were there and watching what happened and doing interviews and conducting focus groups about the different interventions, trying to get information about how well they went and how or what things were difficult and what it was we had to change before we went forward into a full research study. That whole process took 6 months to run that all the way through to the end. Then it took us a while to think about that and make some changes and decide what it was we were going to do. We got our interventions down to 10. Now we had 10 interventions. And now I could go to wards and say, look, we've tried these out on wards. We know that you can actually do these on wards because we've done them on 4 wards in East London. We know it's feasible to get these implemented fairly rapidly. in a decent space of time, and we'd like you to participate in this research study, you can see now that I'm far more likely to convince you. Are you ready to sign up to the 10 and participate in this research study?
I can try.
You can see, because you put all of that work in, it means that you've got a far more reasonable thing to proceed with. So then we went to our full trial, as you can see, in January to June 2013, the full Safewards trial with just those 10 interventions. I'll just pause for a moment and see whether there are any questions about this.
Joo, onko kysymyksiä tästä? Tässä on aika vaikuttava tämä tutkimustausta, mitä tässä on tehty, ihan järjetön määrä selityksiä ja kovaa tiedettä, mutta kysymyksiä, kommentteja. Tuleeko mitä mieleen?
Yes, viisi käyttää mun ralli-englantia, kysyn suomeksi, niin minkälainen rooli erityistyöntekijöillä on ollut tässä suunnittelussa ja toteutuksessa?
Ja tarkoitat niillä?
Psykologeja, toimintaterapeutteja ja sosiaalityöntekijöitä.
Yeah. She wants to know what was the role of psychologists and occupational therapists and maybe social workers in the process of developing these final 10 interventions.
Okay. I employed some of those disciplines as my researchers, so quite a few psychologists were on my research team as well as nurses, so you can say they had a contribution that way. We don't have social workers working on our wards in the UK, hardly at all. It's all very, that's really rather peripheral, and there's much more work for social workers in community care. Psychologists also, unfortunately, we were very poorly resourced with clinical psychologists and inpatient care, so they only do a session or two a week on a ward, if the ward is lucky enough to even get that. All of those disciplines participated in that they contributed to all of the previous research projects, the ones that I did myself and those that other people had done as part of the evidence behind the Safewards study. The occupational therapists had a particular role, I think, in both the pilot study and in the ultimate Safewards, the one that I'm about, the big Safewards study I'm about to tell you about, because they really were a critical member of the ward team together with the nurses in actually deploying the interventions and doing the things that we were asking people to do. So that was a more important partnership. Did we ask psychiatrists or doctors to do anything? If we asked them to do anything, we asked them to not be difficult or get in the way, to not to block progress. And we got a reasonable amount of cooperation in that regard. But these were interventions we were primarily asking the ward nursing team to do. And they were interventions that primarily came out of nursing practice, as you'll see when I tell you what was in there. So nurses and occupational therapists more than any other discipline, yeah.
No, ymmärsitte varmaan, mutta siis sosiaalityöntekijöitä ja psykologeita Englannissa on todella vähän, että ei juurikaan ole siinä käytännössä, niin kuin kuulitte. Toimintaterapeutit on tärkeitä ilman muuta niin kuin tässä intervention toteuttamisessa, mutta tietysti kehittämisessä. Ja lääkäreiden rooli, niin kuin tässä sanottiin, niin toivottiin, että eivät ainakaan hankaloita asioiden etenemistä. Niin kuin meilläkin tietysti Suomessa ovat hyvin mukana tässä.
I would say I was about to be a bit nicer about our psychiatrists in that many of them were enthusiastic supporters of Safewards, and that was, I suppose, an important contribution. Many of our doctors got into it, and certainly they participated in some of the interventions where those were relevant to their practice. We didn't experience anybody of any discipline who was particularly difficult in relation to Safewards. I have had some of those difficulties in the past with different members of different disciplines, but I think those difficulties are disappearing in the UK at the moment, and people are working more collaboratively together. No. Oh yeah, but I want to quiz the back row there. Yeah, there's a lady at this end there with the glasses on. Yeah. Are you working on a ward? So if I came to you with my 10 Safewards interventions, would you say yes? You would, excellent, yes. And the next time you get sent a questionnaire or get invited to participate in an interview by a researcher, are you going to say yes and make time?
Of course, I always say yes.
Yes, oh, what a great supporter, excellent, thank you.